Have you ever heard your child say, "It's just a post," or maybe, "Everyone does it," and in that moment it feels small, harmless, temporary. But here's the uncomfortable truth. Digital life does not disappear the way conversations do. A post can be saved, screenshot, forwarded, reinterpreted, revisited. And most families don't realize a digital footprint is forming until it's already there. This isn't about fear, it's about awareness. Because before your child posts again, there is one conversation that needs to happen first. Today we're talking about digital footprints. What they are, why they matter, and how to guide your child calmly and confidently in a world that never really forgets. Digital life moves fast. A photo, a comment, a joke, a reaction. And in the moment, it feels insignificant. Children don't think in terms of footprints, they think in terms of moments. But digital spaces don't function like playground conversations. When something is shared online, control shifts. It can be copied, saved, shared again, seen by someone you never expected. And here's where most families get it wrong. We focus on the content. But the real issue is visibility. It's not just what is posted. It's who can see it now, and who might see it later. That's the part no one teaches clearly. We teach children how to cross the street. We don't always teach them how to cross the internet. And that gap, not rebellion, not carelessness, is where risk grows. Here's a distinction that changes everything. A digital moment feels temporary. A digital footprint is cumulative. A moment says, "I posted something." A footprint says, "This is the pattern I am building." And patterns are powerful. One post might feel harmless. But 10 posts, 20 posts, a year of reactions, comments, shared opinions. That becomes identity. Not just how others see your child, but how your child begins to see themselves. Digital footprints are not built in dramatic disasters. They're built into ordinary habits. That's why this conversation matters now. Not after something goes wrong, but before patterns harden. Because once a pattern exists, it's much harder to reshape. And the goal isn't to stop participation, it's to shape it intentionally. When families finally realize digital footprints matter, they usually react in one of two ways: extreme control or total freedom. Extreme control sounds like, "Show me your phone, delete that. You're not allowed to use this anymore." It feels protective, but often, it builds secrecy. Then there's the opposite extreme: total freedom. No big deal. They'll figure it out. It's just how kids are now. That feels relaxed. But it leaves children without structure. And structure is what builds judgment. Children don't need panic. They don't need surveillance. They need thinking tools. They need a pause. Not a punishment. Not a lecture. A pause. Because most online mistakes don't happen from bad character. They happen from speed. Speed removes reflection. Reflection restores control. And that's the shift families need to make. Here's a simple shift that changes everything. Instead of saying, "Don't post that," try teaching this pause. 3 questions. Before sharing anything online, ask, "Who is this really for? How might this be interpreted? Would I feel comfortable with this later?" That's it. Simple. But powerful. Because these questions slow the moment down. They introduce perspective. They move a child from impulse to intention. When a child asks, "Who is this really for?" they begin to think about the audience. When they ask, "How might this be interpreted?" they begin to think about misunderstanding. And when they ask, "Would I feel comfortable with this later?" they begin to think long term. This isn't about controlling posts. It's about building internal judgment. And internal judgment lasts longer than rules. This conversation doesn't need to be dramatic. It doesn't need to happen after a crisis. In fact, it works best before one. You don't have to sit down and give a lecture. You can start small. During dinner. In the car. After seeing something online together, you might ask, "What do you think stays online longer than people expect?" Or, "Why do you think some posts get misunderstood?" These aren't interrogation questions. They're thinking invitations. And when children feel invited into a conversation, not judged inside it, they open up. The goal is not to monitor every action. The goal is to build a habit of reflection. When reflection becomes normal, impulsivity decreases naturally. And over time, children begin asking the questions on their own. That's when you know the skill is forming. I understand this. I just don't know how to structure the conversation. That's exactly why I created the Digital Footprint Toolkit for families. Not as a rulebook, not as a fear manual, but as a structured conversation guide. Inside the toolkit, families work through real-life posting scenarios, a digital reflection audit, a sharing pause worksheet, a family digital standards agreement, and guided questions that make this topic easier to approach calmly. Because awareness without structure fades, but awareness with structure becomes habit, and habit shapes identity. This workbook is part of the Digital Parenting Made Clear series. The first book focuses on mindset. This one focuses on application. You don't need both to start, but together they create clarity and confidence. If your child is already online, the conversation cannot wait. Not because something terrible will happen tomorrow, but because patterns are forming now. Digital footprints don't grow in one dramatic mistake. They grow in unnoticed habits, in quick reactions, in unpaused moments. And the earlier reflection begins, the easier those patterns are to shape. You don't need to overhaul everything tonight. Start with one question. Just one. What do you think happens to something once it's shared? Let them think. Let them answer. That small pause opens the door, because once a child begins thinking long-term, they begin protecting themselves. And that is the goal. Not control, not fear, confidence. There's something else most families underestimate. Digital footprints don't just affect today, they affect interpretation later. And later doesn't always mean college admissions or job interviews. Sometimes later means a new friendship, a new school year, a new team, a new community. People search. Peers search. Even children search for each other, and what they find becomes context. Now imagine this. Two children walk into the same classroom. One has a digital presence filled with thoughtful, kind, constructive participation. The other has a pattern of impulsive reactions, public arguments, or oversharing. Neither child intended to build that reputation. But patterns speak. Digital participation creates narrative. And narratives influence opportunity, not because the world is cruel, but because digital space remembers. That's why this conversation isn't about punishment, it's about protecting long-term identity. We don't want children growing up afraid of the internet, we want them to grow up skilled in it. Here's something important that often gets missed. Most online mistakes are not intentional. They are impulsive. And impulse is powerful. Especially in children and teenagers. The brain develops in layers. The emotional center develops earlier. The long-term planning center develops later. So when something feels funny, unfair, exciting, or urgent, emotion moves first, reflection moves second, and in digital spaces that gap matters. Because digital platforms are built for speed, quick reactions, instant replies, immediate sharing. There is very little built-in pause, which means families must create the pause intentionally. That's why yelling doesn't work, and ignoring doesn't work. What works is teaching children to insert one extra step between feeling and posting. One breath, one question, one moment. That small gap protects reputation, relationships, and identity. And that's a skill that lasts beyond childhood. Digital life is not going away. But panic is not the answer, control is not the answer. Ignoring it is not the answer, clarity is. The goal is not to stop your child from participating online. The goal is to help them participate with awareness, with intention, with confidence. Digital footprints are shaped one decision at a time. And small pauses today prevent regret tomorrow. If this conversation helped you think differently about online sharing, I've linked the Digital Footprint Toolkit for families below. It's designed to make these conversations structured, calm, and practical. And if you want deeper framework guidance, this is part of the Digital Parenting Made Clear series. We don't build fear here, we build judgment. And judgment builds confidence. If this conversation was helpful, I'd love for you to like, subscribe, and tap the notification bell so you're notified when the next video goes live. Every bit of support helps this channel grow and reach more families who need calm, practical digital guidance. Thank you for watching.